Hey, Sens fans, welcome to Season 4, Episode 2 of the Senstennial Podcast. And on this week's episode, we're joined by a good friend of the show here, William Scouch. Will Scouch, he is a head of video analysis at McKeen's Hockey, very cool, and the founder of Scouching, where he does lots of scouting reports on prospects for each of the entry drafts. So we got Will on the show today because we want to ask him some questions about the Sens and the upcoming season and all the hype surrounding them. So we'll get right into it, kick things off. Hot Pierre summer. Now we already talked about it a little bit on last week's episode, but we wanted your thoughts on the trades, the signings, extensions, what you thought about Hot Pierre summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I think it's a big step forward for Ottawa. I think it's been a long time coming. And it's a welcome shift because Ottawa has been, you all know better than me, but a bit rough. But, you look at that, you look at least in terms of scoring depth and what the, I don't think it's perfect, but it is so much better than what it was. And I get the feeling that they will probably improve quite significantly so long as, everything outside of scoring can at least be adequate. And I think there's enough pieces there to make it adequate. And I think if you can do that, I don't think they're a major playoff contender, but there's a possibility, I think, that they might push for a wild card spot potentially. That division's tough. The Atlantic is going to be tough, but you never know, right? Like an injury here and there on another team, goalie goes down, whatever, someone just has a really rotten season, who knows? You got a new coach in Boston, for example, an aging sort of core in Boston, and they're a good team, but you never know. And maybe Ottawa can squeak one out and get past them or something during the course of the season. But I think they made a lot of really good moves. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm strapped in, I'm ready to go.
Now, you already touched on it a little bit, but I was going to ask what your expectations were for the Sens going into this season. Is that where you have them as like best case scenario, making a wild card spot, or do you see them as if everything goes smoothly, they do better than that?
I mean, like, are the Ottawa Senators a better hockey team than the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and one of the Boston Bruins or Florida Panthers? The Panthers, I think the Panthers in Ottawa are strangely in a similar-ish scenario where I look at Florida's defensive depth and see a big old question mark there, like a lot of people do. In net, they obviously have a much more solid and strong sort of pair. As long as Bobrovsky has a good Bobrovsky season. If he's not, then that's problematic, and you just hope that Spencer Knight can pick up the slack. But Ottawa doesn't really have that. Like, I like Anton Forsberg. He's been fine in Ottawa. Cam Talbot, he's been rock solid for years. Like, if you get rock solid goaltending out of Cam Talbot and Anton Forsberg isn't like historical average Anton Forsberg of like a moderately okay NHL backup, you'll be okay. But in my expectation is they would have to really, the two teams with really, really good goaltending, ideally speaking, right? Bobrovsky and Knight, or Swayman and Ullmark in Boston.
Yeah.
Like, I like Jeremy Swayman a lot. That guy can stop pucks. Like, it could be a bit of a mess there. It might be close, but I think a wild card spot, when you look at what's going on in the Metropolitan Division, I think it's a pretty wide open competition for those wild card spots. Maybe the last one, and maybe Ottawa pulls a rabbit out of their hat. You never know. It might be one of those things where they win 2 extra games when they should have won, and they didn't, and they could have won the division, but not won the division, but gotten into that top 3. But I certainly think they will be better, so long as that defensive group can hold its own and the goaltending is adequate.
Yeah, and I definitely think the defensive core is where most of the question marks are, but I think we'll get to that a little while later. But Bennett or Matt, I don't know if you guys have similar expectations as Will, or where do you think the Sens end up?
I actually have thought about this a lot, and I think you have to, as a Sens fan, you have to think about all of the possibilities that are going to take place when you're in a bit of a dogfight for a wild card spot. Because I mean, the East has a lot of really good teams, And Ottawa suddenly is pushed into a tier with some really solid teams. I'd say the expectations for the Sens are going to be much higher this season, obviously from the off season that we had just had, and then moving forward, being a bottom 10 team to now a possible playoff team. The more important thing for the Sens here, though, is that strong start. In October, they're playing 8 games, and 6 of those 8 opponents were playoff teams last year. The first 10 games are against 7 of 10. 7 of them were playoff teams. So if you come out of that 10-game mark and you're at 500, I think that's probably a really solid expectation. If you're above that, that's great, but you can't be below that for the Sens. They need a really strong start. But I did, when you brought up Florida and Boston, Will, I think those are 2 teams that are kind of ripe for the picking, because Boston has some really big injuries to some big players. Like Charlie McAvoy's out until the start of the new year, I believe, and Brad Marchand's in the same boat. And those are 2 like very crucial players to their success. And then you brought it up. Florida's D is not good. I mean, outside of Ekblad, their next best, I believe, is Gustav Forsling. And that's probably their Zub. But yeah, it's one of those situations where if your forward core is better, or if your D is better, you get a spot. And I think there are a lot of factors, but I like Ottawa's chances just with what they put together and where things are. But I'm sure Bennett has a lot of good insight on this as well.
All I'll say is that I'm going to dive into some semantics here. I think last week I said that the Sens are a playoff team this year. I think you could make the case that playoff team isn't, is a playoff team all the teams at the end of the season to make the playoffs, or the teams that are there or thereabouts. And I think we're absolutely there or thereabouts. What I want to see from the Sens this season, what I think is definitely achievable, is to see them playing meaningful games until right up at the end of the season. And if that means we just get in or just get out, either way, I'm happy. What I don't want to see is what we've seen the last couple of seasons, where we've dug ourselves a massive hole by the end of November, and no matter how well we play thereafter, we can't get out.
That's a good way of putting it.
Sorry. I think is like the only real way that this coming season could be like a legitimate failure.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, look, I think being a person who's here in Toronto, I think I also know that there's a destiny aspect to all this, and that they're going to finish third in the division. Toronto's going to finish second. They're going to play in the first round, and they're going to beat them in Game 7. Toronto's going to go up like 3-0 in the series. It's going to be like blowout. And then the Ottawa Senators are just going to start bullying the Toronto Maple Leafs and pissing them off, and they're going to win 1-0, 2-1, 1-0, and like triple overtime, and then Game 7. It's going to be a disaster, but I'm fully throwing that against the wall. That's like, that's what I'm trying to manifest. Anton Forsberg, pulls 6 rabbits out of his hat, saves 50 shots a night, calls it a day, and they move on to the second round and get swept by someone. But that's the storyline I'm expecting out of the Ottawa Senators this year. But I think that's a really good way of putting it. Like, play competitive games that mean something until the end of the year. If you miss by a point or 2 points, that's fine. But I mean, I think they're good enough to get there, right? Like it's they're not, if they're in the lottery again, something's got to be different, right? Like there's something missing. I think there's weaknesses with the team, but they're not so weak from like, okay, they're going to be in the basement again, right? Like and it's been a problem with them for years for me, which is like their depth down the middle. Like, it's fine. They got guys they can play, right? Josh Norris, they're trying to play Tim Stützle up the middle more, but they're sitting they've got real good wingers surrounding some solid centers, and that D is weak. And we'll see how it goes, right? Like, if day one of the NHL postseason is, Tim Stützle first line center lining up with Austin Matthews, that's a tough matchup. And like I said, Ottawa's going to win the series. Like, that's just how it's going to work. But I still think that they're going to be significantly better than they have been.
Yeah.
Please inject this first round scenario into my veins.
Oh, I'm so prepared for it. I've been thinking about it since the day Alex DeBrincat became an Ottawa Senator and Pierre Dorian. Like when I think what was the rumor that Pierre Dorian was going to trade Matt Murray and their top 10 pick to trade down just to get rid of his contract.
So
Yeah.
So what would have happened? Is Murray would have ended up in Buffalo.
Right.
Then Ottawa would have flipped the pick they got from Buffalo because I believe Buffalo is going to send a pick back or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Ottawa was going to then flip that and a prospect and another like couple draft picks like they did in the trade that actually happened. And they were going to get DeBrincat. It just would have cost them a prospect probably like Greg or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Murray's biggest save.
Yeah.
Yes. No kidding. Yeah.
Honestly, my expectation, like I think for the Atlantic, it's going to be tough to grab a top 3 spot in the Atlantic this season. I think where things get interesting is that wild card spot in the Metro. I think you have, teams like the Rangers, Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Washington, who are probably bound for playoffs just by looking at the rosters on paper. But I think that's that wild card spot. If the Sens can keep that wild card spot in the Atlantic, or beat out one of the other top Metro teams to keep that extra wild card spot, I think really that's where they make it. But who knows? Like Will said, a key injury to a player on another team, like hypothetically, if the Leafs lost Matthews, that would be a huge blow to them, I think. So something like that, and the Sens could find themselves, I think, in the 3rd divisional spot. But I think it also comes down to maybe some upgrades or changes on the blue line, but maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. So I think what we want to touch on next is you've obviously studied prospects. You do a lot of analysis on prospects. How has your analysis changed from when Ottawa's top young players that they have on the team now were young and you were scouting them and they were in junior or playing, in Europe or what have you, to now when they've had at least 2 NHL seasons under their belt?
With regards to like everything or just the Sens guys in general?
Yeah, just like the Sens guys, like when you're looking at guys like Stützle or Norris, Kachuk, when you scouted them, because you've been doing this since about 2016, I think.
Yeah, like I kind of started it up in 2016 seriously. The viewing and tracking data didn't really start until 2019, and then 2020 was when it kind of exploded. But I've been watching these guys for years, and I think with Ottawa in particular, again, it's been the same parable with Ottawa for years, right? Like what type of team they were trying to be and are still trying to be, right? Like you can clearly tell that they want to be a bunch of jerks who have some skill and can play, right? Like they want that style of play, unless skill is just beating them over the head and then they take it, right? Like Tim Stützle in that range. I think a big one where I wouldn't say it was a miss on my part, but I definitely think, because I had Jake Sanderson ranked at like 10 or 11 on my list, and I thought at 5 like there were players you could have picked that would have looked better. Like for example, imagine Anton Lundell playing with the Ottawa Senators over the last 12 months or into the next season. Like he was great with Florida last year, and so when people like Jake Sanderson's going to be a great defenseman, and they're almost a year apart in terms of birth date. And I think, I think it just goes to show that 2020 right up at the top was really, really, really hard to pick through. And there were a lot of really, really good options. And Jake Sanderson, I think, he really has, the big thing with him was like figuring out a sweet spot of like, he seemed to be very timid the first half of the season. I watched him, and then the back half, it's like his coach slapped him on the back of the head and was like, bro, you're Jake Sanderson. Like, go for a skate, like go play hockey, like go shoot the puck yourself, like do stuff yourself. And he went, okay. And then he was Jake Sanderson for the rest of the year. And I think that with a lot of the Sens guys, like, yes, there have been misses with their draft picks. There have been, I've said this on your show every single time, but I look at Tim Stützle and I go, that you have the opportunity to combine him with like an elite level center at some point, and you could have a 100-point winger. Like just absolve him of the defensive responsibilities that a center has to have, and you let him sort of just be himself and like free flow offense, and just score. Because they still don't have that FU scoring guy, right? Like Toronto has 4 of them, 5 of them, like Matthews, Tavares, Marner, Nylander. That's 4 guys who can score a point a game or more and like rocket. And I feel like Tim Stützle playing up the middle removes his potential of being that style of player. And they have had opportunities to add more players like that could help up the middle and sort of quarterback lines, and they haven't done it. So, they have a lot of really interesting prospects, but if they drafted as much as they have over the last few years and didn't have a bunch of interesting prospects, they'd be doing a horrible job. So it's like they're doing really well. Could they be doing better? Potentially. But you look at the type of guys they really seem to value. It could, because this is hockey, like it could work, right? Like Ridley Gregg might get suspended 3 times in a season, but he plays a role that is going to be very valuable, and certain people are going to go bananas over it, which is fine. Like I don't know. I think over the years, it's just been interesting watching the guys the Senators draft and develop. There's a lot of guys where I'm going, yeah, that's a good player, like Shane Pinto, good player, but there's also player XYZ who went afterwards, and I'm going, those guys might also be really interesting with the Ottawa Senators. Like Pinto's a fine middle 6 center. Sure, at the end of his development curve, that's where I could see him slotting in. A good 3rd line guy, fine. And like 2nd round pick, that's great. But there's always these situations where it's like, yeah, you picked a good one, but there were some bunts there that were sort of 1-2, whatever. So they've got, but they haven't botched a bunch of them, right? Like that's the good side of it. And I think that it's a big reason why they're sort of turning the corner. I think the Erik Karlsson deal in retrospect has been a huge game changer, right? Like that, people ridiculed it at the time. And I mean, I'd have to go back. I made a video about it at the time, and I think I was a little more tepid about it, where it's like, well, there's a lot of like, we'll see with this deal, and like maybe this will all work out. And I did like Josh Norris at the time, and I think Josh Norris has become better than I thought he would be. I think that's a top 6 center that can score, and I think that's a really solid sort of, maybe not elite sort of franchise guy at your top end, but like a really good sort of number 2 or a really excellent number 3, right? Like on a championship caliber team, which is great. But yeah, I think they've been coming along pretty well. You can still look back on the drafts and be like, well, you could have done this, and this, but they still came out, because they had so many picks, they came out with quite a few interesting players, some better than others, but yeah, I mean, what can you say? Everybody loves Tim Stützle. Everybody will love Jake Sanderson if they haven't seen a ton of him already. Like I've certainly warmed up a lot to Jake Sanderson at that 5 slot. But again, I look at other guys at that 5 slot and I go, yeah, but there's a lot of other interesting options that also haven't played in the NHL or even have. So yeah, I think they've done well, pretty well. Could they be a rock solid playoff contending team if they had, changed some things with the benefit of hindsight? Potentially, but I think it's still too early to tell with a lot of these guys, but it's coming along. It's coming along pretty well.
Okay. That'll be the awkward pause, and then I can edit it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry, went on a little long. I just because thinking through it, right? There's a lot of guys to think.
No, that's totally cool.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome insight. Thanks so much for that, Will. So we want to jump to the next one, which is, what do you think of the top prospects who will be getting some full-time NHL roles this season? And you just touched on Shane Pinto and Jake Sanderson, but I guess we'll kind of ask you it from a different angle. And, you've seen them as prospects. What do you think they'll actually contribute to the Ottawa Senators this season, with Shane Pinto likely to slot in that 3C spot, and Jake Sanderson, at least on paper now, starting in that number 2 left pairing defenseman?
I don't see Jake Sanderson really having that much of an issue translating to the NHL. I just, the thing that stuck out to me when he was draft eligible was his defensive game. And, it was a lot of what I wanted more out of him was like more assertiveness. He has this really good defensive ability that's already there, and the puck carrying is already there, but he didn't really put it all together in the offensive zone. He was much more sort of laid back there, but with North Dakota, I think over time he was given a lot more freedom to sort of play that way. The X factor to me with all of this young players playing in Ottawa thing is DJ Smith. Like I still think that DJ Smith looks at a guy like Ridley Gregg and goes, that's the NHL player that I want, and looks at a guy like Jake Sanderson, who plays this sort of more free-flowing offensive style, and goes, that makes me a little uneasy. Like, not necessarily like in a bad way, but I'm just like, whenever I see the Ottawa Senators play and looking at the guys they sign as free agents and all this stuff, I'm like, look at what's happened with like Eric Brandstrom over the last couple of years. It's like they're trying to get these guys to maybe be something they're not, and sort of withholding them artificially because they're not falling into this sort of category, or they're not playing with enough balls to use a word. But I think Jake Sanderson, though, through it all, he's going to slot in just fine. Like, Thomas Chabot isn't being artificially withheld because he's Thomas frickin' Chabot. You don't do that. And I think Sanderson can prove that he deserves the right to be given the freedom to do whatever he does. And also, he's not 5'10", which also certainly helps in the eyes of a guy like DJ Smith. So I think he's going to play and do just fine. I mean, there's not a whole lot of talent in front of him that he has to leapfrog to play a lot of minutes, I don't think. Like, it's not going to take much to convince me that he's going to be a better player in the lineup than like Nick Holden. So I think that's a positive. Shane Pinto, I mean, again, I have solid expectations of Pinto. Like you said, third line center, perfectly suitable guy, dependable at both ends. He's got some skill. He can make a play here and there. Like, I like Shane Pinto quite a bit. And it's just a matter of, tempering your expectations to the point where it's like, you give him some sheltered minutes, you let him to play this shutdown role, use that skill to get pucks up ice and sort of doing those little things the right way. We'll see what happens with Ridley Gregg. Whether he plays up the middle or on the wing, like, we'll see how it goes if he does crack the NHL team this year. I mean, I get the feeling you throw that guy on the fourth line and play him 10 minutes a night and throw him around the ice, throwing his body weight around all night. He's going to make some fans happy. He's going to probably endear himself to the coaching staff a little bit. And there could be something there that gives them a little bit of an energy boost at the bottom end of the lineup, which carries some value as well. I mean, I'm not sure exactly who else is likely to really sort of punch their ticket into the NHL full time. Like, Lassie Thompson, I didn't think he was very good with the Senators last year. Whenever I watched him, like, you saw moments, but especially with his shot, but I still feel like there's a bit of a ways to go for him to be that, staunch NHL defender that can defend at the NHL level. But I have none of the same concerns with a guy like Sanderson. And if anyone else cracks the roster full time over those guys, I might be a little surprised, but you never know, right? Like, strange things happen all the time, especially in this sport.
Well, they still have Nikita Zaitsev signed for another 2 seasons. Anything is possible.
It's true. They do. He's there.
He's one of the more interesting pieces of the Ottawa Senators. I know we did just sign Tyler Mott, and he seems to be like a really, really good fourth liner and like a solid enough third liner. Do you think somebody of his defensive acumen can sort of do some positive things for Pinto's game going forward, or do you even think they're at the same level right now in their prospective skill sets?
Well, I think that what you're kind of touching on is something that you can't really evaluate very well from an on ice view. I think what you want out of a guy like Tyler Mott, like, he is, I mean, I don't think Shane Pinto's going to have the same problem, but Tyler Mott has really had to sort of earn his way through the NHL. Like, he's 27,
Sure, yeah.
And I think that in that sense, like, you don't pay a guy $1.35 million and expect not to play him on the team. So I get the feeling that Mott will be on the roster. And I agree, like, as a fourth line guy, I'd much rather have him in that slot than like a Mark Kastelich, right? Like, Kastelich has been okay, but I look at Tyler Mott as a fourth line guy and go, okay, like, sure. And I think what you're getting at, I think emotionally in the locker room and such, like, you're going to need guys who have been through the ringer and understand how tough staying in the NHL can be, right? Even if you're, Shane Pinto wasn't a super high draft pick, but Tyler Mott was farther back in the draft, and he's small and had to work. And so I think that that's a benefit that benefits everybody. Like, in terms of playing style, sure, it wouldn't hurt. You got a hardworking bottom end of your lineup guy who goes. which is fine. But I get the feeling that it'll be more of a culture thing, a word I hate to use, but there's definitely, especially with young teams with players in positions when they're young where they're looking at being successful, you kind of do need a bit of that sort of non-young influence that can sort of get them in the right headspace and keep them going straight. And I think Tyler Mott could be a good example of that, just by judging how his career has gone and how he's carried himself sort of around the league over the course of how many years it's been.
Yeah, and I mean, also while Formanton remains unsigned and obviously part of the Hockey Canada investigation, I think Tyler Mott was a nice player to bring in because of his defensive analytics. He's a guy you can plop in alongside Pinto and Joseph and just see what that line can do. I think defensively that line could be phenomenal and really help you out on the penalty kill too.
I totally forgot you guys had Matthew Joseph. I love Matthew Joseph. Just over the last few years watching Tampa, like, he's stuck out, and I totally forgot that he was in Ottawa, and that is low key smart.
And actually, one of the things I remember watching a Sens versus Tampa game before he was on the Sens and when he was playing for them. And he was actually like one of the 4 players that really stood out for Tampa because I could not stand him. Like he played the pest role really well. He was like digging at goalies. He was making late hits, but like clean enough and not called. Like, he was playing a game that you love to see and towing that line. And I genuinely believe like he's a great third liner. And, you know, with Formanton unsigned and with everything going on with Hockey Canada, and you brought up Ridley Gregg, it would be a really interesting line if Mott played on the 4th line and they put Ridley Gregg on that other wing, because oh my God, if you want to talk about
it only lasts 2 shifts.
Maybe, but like Pinto was that guy too for the States in the World Juniors a couple of years ago. He played an interesting role on North Dakota. That could be a proverbial shit disturber line, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, we got one more for you before you take off for the night. As we've kind of been alluding to, the Sens could definitely upgrade their club, and I think that upgrade would be most well served on the blue line. Is there any player out there? Obviously, Chikrin's been in the rumor mill a lot, but is there any blue liner out there who maybe hasn't come up as much, who you think would be a good fit that might be available for the Sens to go out and acquire?
You know who the first name that popped into my head, and I think he's a righty. The first name that popped into my head was Travis Sanheim. If the Philadelphia Flyers continue to crap their pants, and I believe he's a righty.
Because I thought he was a left, but if you
I don't know. I mean,
for the longest time, I thought Provorov was a right-handed, and I was like, oh, he's perfect.
Okay, so Sanheim is left-handed.
Yeah.
But okay, so maybe not him. But I mean,
can he play the right side?
I'm just thinking of teams near the bottom of the lineup that have right-handed defensemen that might be available on the market. Especially, it's hard to evaluate because it's only September as well.
Is it Connor Murphy who's on the Blackhawks? He's a right-hand defenseman?
Yeah, you could go with him. Sorry, I'm just pulling up a list of all the right-handed defensemen in the National Hockey League.
Just every single one.
Yeah,
I mean, my dream one is Shea Theodore, right? Like, and Vegas is going to be an interesting position with everything that's going on. Like, at what point do they decide that, you know, maybe they aren't going for it all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you hear his name every year, it seems, but Damon Severson could be a one where if the New Jersey Devils just go screw it, like I don't know. I've heard that over the years the Devils have like ebbed and flowed on what they think about him, and if you can catch them at that ebb and be like, let's just snag him when people don't want him, then go nuts, and maybe you could pull that one off. Like I'm looking at this list of guys and I'm not sure who teams would actually want to trade. It's kind of funny. Like, I'm just going through this and it's like, okay, these guys already have been traded. Like Cody Cece's on this list, and I don't think you want him again. You know, like is
No, that
Calgary
was
like is Calgary going to have to move a guy because of salary constraints? Like I doubt it. You know, the Islanders just locked up Ryan Pulock. Nick Jensen, I've always liked him in Washington. Like he might be a nice low cost pickup if Washington season doesn't go very well. Like he's cheapish. Play him on the right side. He's a nice foil for a guy who maybe wants to play with a bit more freedom in offense.
I know there's been chatter about Ethan Bear as well.
That could be a good one as well. Ethan Bear, if you feel like he would come relatively cheap. I think he could be there. There's a couple of options. Just depends on what the market is, right? Like a lot of teams really like these right-handed defensemen, right? Like there's not that many that you really, really want on your sort of top four, which is what I think Ottawa wants.
Yeah.
And it seems like no matter what, Ottawa doesn't want to part with anyone. So we'll see how long that lasts. You know, maybe they could poach someone like if Montreal just wants to say screw it and get rid of like a Jeff Petrie and you just go all in.
He's already gone. He's
already gone. Was
They
it
got
John
Matt-
I
Marino?
don't think
No, they
he
got
ever wants to
Matheson.
play for
Yeah, I
in
guess it's
Canada
done.
ever again.
Yeah, see, I've been in like hibernation mode for like a month and a
Yeah.
half, so I'm kind of out of it. But
Yeah, they got
Yeah.
Matheson.
Yeah,
Marino went to the Devils.
yes, he did. Always like John Marino. He would have been one
Yes.
too if he hadn't been traded this
Yeah.
offseason.
I
He would have
thought-
been one that I would have stuck my neck out for.
And he's a guy who I thought Ottawa might, well, a lot of people thought Ottawa might be interested in because Ryan Bonus served as one of their, I think it was senior VP or something, or VP of player development, some role like that for the Penguins. So there was maybe some bias there on a professional level, Sens fans thought, but ended up not happening. So
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is it's relatively slim pickings. At
Yeah.
least based on like logical possibilities
yeah,
that you might want to play in your top four, but you never know. Names pop up all the time. I'd say Damon Severson is the one that sticks out the most. Is like maybe finally the Devils would be willing to move on from him, and I feel like he could slot in pretty well because I think he's pretty good, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
he's not, but most of the time he's pretty good.
and last name I'll throw out, pending UFA, Matt Dumba might be a guy potentially.
Potentially, unless the Wild win 8 straight out of the gate, and then he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they traded Fiala so they could re-sign him. So I don't think
Right.
he's going to go anywhere. But I think Mackenzie Weegar is one of the guys that you should keep an eye on.
Possibly, yes.
Perfect. All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Will. For everybody watching, if you don't know who Will Scouch is, you can find him on Twitter at Scouching, and obviously you can find him on YouTube as well. We talked about his channel earlier. He reviews all the draft eligible prospects, every single one. And
Don't put that on me.
and
Not even-
and yeah,
Okay.
you can find Will's a great guy, so make sure you follow his Twitter and his YouTube page. And for us, you can find us on all the social medias, on Twitter at Senstennial, Instagram at the Senstennial Podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, well, then you know where to find us there. If you're listening to the audio version, you can find us on YouTube. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. And hope you all have a great week. Go Sens, go. Enjoy preseason.
Thanks, Will. Take care.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime, guys.